In just over 7 years inside the UFC, Magomed Ankalaev has built one of the most terrifying resumes in the entire light heavyweight division. A record of 20 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. 13 straight fights without a single defeat. Former champions, title challengers, and knockout artists all crossed off the list. He's held the light heavyweight title, and he currently sits at number 1 in the world rankings, meaning that the Dagestani is a scary individual you don't want to cross paths with, let alone look him in the eye and talk crap. Yet over the years, a few guys tried to poke the bear anyway, and almost every single one of them got humbled for it. The first, and by far the loudest, was Ion Cutelaba. Cutelaba, nicknamed the Hulk, was one of the most aggressive, in-your-face fighters in the division. He didn't just talk. He got physical before the fight even started. During Bruce Buffer's introductions at UFC Norfolk in February 2020, while the two men were supposed to be standing in their corners, Cutelaba marched all the way across the octagon, walked straight up to Ankalaev, and bumped him with his chest and his forehead. Ankalaev didn't flinch. He didn't shove back. He didn't shout. He didn't play up to the crowd. He instinctively tied Cutelaba up and controlled him, and security had to run in and pull the two apart before the fight had even been announced. The Moldovan was screaming. Ankalaev's expression barely changed. Here's the thing about doing that to a man from Dagestan who has been fighting his entire life. He doesn't forget it, and he doesn't need to say anything back. When the horn sounded, Cutelaba came charging straight at him, exactly like everyone knew he would. Ankalaev cracked him with a head kick, then followed it with punches to the face, and within seconds, the Hulk's legs had turned to rubber. Cutelaba was stumbling all over the cage, still swinging haymakers, but the damage was already done. Referee Kevin McDonald saw those legs and waved it off at 38 seconds. 38 seconds. That's how long the disrespect lasted. All that chest bumping and forehead pressing answered inside the time it takes most fighters to figure out the range. Now the stoppage was controversial, and Ankalaev's explanation afterward was about as calm and cold as it gets. He said he hurt him, that he connected the high kick, that Cutelaba was wobbling and the referee stepped in, and that's all he had to say about it. But Cutelaba wasn't done talking. He protested immediately, screamed at the referee, and stormed back to the locker room furious. And then came the part that guaranteed a rematch. Cutelaba claimed he had faked it. He said he was in control of every strike, that he was countering when the referee stopped it, and that being wobbled had actually been part of the game plan. You can imagine how that landed with a man who had just knocked him half unconscious in under 40 seconds. The rematch became one of the most cursed bookings in modern UFC history, and the wait only let the bad blood get worse. It was rebooked for UFC 249, which got canceled. Then UFC 252, where Cutelaba tested positive for COVID. Then UFC Vegas 8, where Cutelaba tested positive again. 5 separate attempts before the fight finally happened at UFC 254 in Abu Dhabi in October 2020, on the same card where Khabib Nurmagomedov fought for the last time. And this time, Ankalaev made absolutely certain there would be no argument, no controversy, and no excuses. He hunted Cutelaba down and knocked him out cold in the 4th minute of the first round. Not a wobble, not a referee judgment call, a clean, undeniable, lights-out knockout. 2 fights, 2 finishes, and one very clear message to anyone else in the division thinking about walking across the cage during Bruce Buffer's introduction. The next man to talk was Anthony Smith. Smith is a former title challenger, a genuine veteran, and one of the toughest men to ever compete at 205 pounds. He also has one of the best microphones in the sport, and he was never shy about using it on Ankalaev. Smith's whole position, publicly, was that the hype was overblown. He said Ankalaev wasn't the boogeyman everybody was making him out to be. They met at UFC 277 in Dallas in July 2022 on a huge pay-per-view card. And Ankalaev set about answering that claim as literally as it can possibly be answered. He spent the first round chopping into Smith's legs with kick after kick, taking away his movement and his base, methodically dismantling the veteran's ability to plant his feet and fight back. It wasn't flashy and it wasn't fast. It was just relentless. In the second round, he took him to the mat and unloaded ground and pound until referee intervention was the only option left. The fight was waved off at 3:09 of round 2. Smith kept talking afterward, and he's kept talking ever since. He called Ankalaev's style unexciting. He questioned his wrestling credentials. After Ankalaev beat Alex Pereira at UFC 313, Smith went on his podcast and called him an absolute liar because Ankalaev had said before that fight he wouldn't rely on wrestling, and then wrestled anyway. And Ankalaev's response to years of that? He simply said Smith was the easiest fighter he had ever faced. Cold, short, devastating. No insults, no volume, just a dismissal of a former title challenger as the least difficult night of his career. Next up was Johnny Walker, and this one had a genuinely chaotic history behind it. Walker is one of the most flamboyant, unpredictable, high-risk strikers the division has ever seen. Flying knees, spinning attacks, wild energy. He came into their first meeting at UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi in October 2023, riding a 3-fight winning streak, having beaten Ion Cutelaba, Paul Craig, and Anthony Smith back-to-back-to-back. Interesting note there. 2 of those 3 names are men Ankalaev had already dealt with himself. Walker was confident, he was ranked, and he had every reason to believe he was next in line. That first fight ended in complete confusion. Ankalaev landed a knee on a grounded Walker in the first round. The strike was ruled illegal, and Walker was deemed unable to continue. No contest. Walker was visibly bewildered about why the doctor and referee had called it off, and the whole thing was left unresolved in the ugliest way possible. So they ran it back 3 months later, in January 2024, headlining the UFC's first card of the year. This time, there was nothing to argue about. Ankalaev spent the entire first round sitting just outside of range, completely unbothered, while Walker threw flashy, inefficient attacks that landed on nothing but air. It was the same pattern as always. Let the loud one empty the tank, then start working. Round 2 is where the discipline paid off. Ankalaev landed a heavy overhand right that dropped Walker to a seated position against the fence, then followed with an uppercut that broke his nose. Referee Mark Goddard stepped in at 242. 3-fight winning streak, gone. Nose, broken. Rivalry, closed. Ankalaev took performance of the night for it and walked straight back into the title conversation. To Walker's credit, he took the loss like a professional. He posted afterward that he was fine apart from a scratch on his nose, congratulated Ankalaev, and said he hoped his conqueror went on to win the belt. And it's worth pointing out what happened to the ones who came in respectful and quiet, because it wasn't much better. Volkan Ozdemir, Nikita Krylov, Thiago Santos, and Alexander Rakic are all former title challengers or ranked contenders, and all 4 of them were simply outworked over 15 or 25 minutes. No highlight reel needed. Just a man walking forward, digging into their legs, and never letting them settle for a single round. Which brings us to the biggest name on the list, and the loudest buildup of Ankalaev's entire career, Alex Pereira. By early 2025, Pereira was the reigning light heavyweight champion, a 2-division UFC title holder, and the most feared knockout artist in the sport. He was also, at that point, the biggest personality in the entire company, a genuine social media phenomenon famous for mocking his opponents relentlessly, both before and after finishing them. Poatan had made a career out of getting inside people's heads and then knocking those heads off. And he made his intentions about Ankalaev very clear. Speaking to Ariel Helwani ahead of UFC 313, Pereira said that people had already seen him make fun of his other opponents, sometimes as a joke, but that Ankalaev was the one he was really going to make fun of. Now, Ankalaev is not a man who trades insults for fun. He almost never engages, but he engaged with this one, and he did not respond politely. He accused Pereira of lying about having asked for the fight, told him it had been a dead-end street, and finished with a line that got clipped and reposted everywhere. He told the champion he was going to eat his heart. Then, when Pereira posted a viral training video working on his wrestling with Glover Teixeira out in the snow, Ankalaev's entire response was one sentence. He hoped Pereira was ready to do it for 25 minutes. That turned out to be the most accurate prediction of the entire buildup, and nobody realized it at the time. At UFC 313 on March 8, 2025, in front of a packed T-Mobile arena, Ankalaev did something no one else had managed against Pereira. He refused to give him room. He walked him down, crowded him, took away the space Poatan needs to load up that left hook, and forced him to fight going backwards for 5 straight rounds.
The most feared striker in mixed martial arts spent 25 minutes being made to work, and by the championship rounds, he looked heavy, slow, and deeply frustrated. Ankalaev pinned his back to the cage for a long stretch of round 4 and dictated the pace of the fight almost throughout. The man who was supposed to be mocked never got a single moment to do any mocking. The scorecards read 48-47, 48-47, and 49-46. Magomed Ankalaev was the UFC light heavyweight champion of the world, and then he twisted the knife. In his post-fight comments, he said Pereira had spent 20 minutes running. Here's the thing about this sport, though. Nobody stays on top of the mountain forever, and the humbling can go both ways. Pereira got his rematch at UFC 320 in October 2025, and he did to Ankalaev exactly what Ankalaev had done to so many others. He caught him early, swarmed him, and finished it just over a minute into the first round. The reign was over almost as soon as it had started, and Poatan got to walk out of the arena with his belt and his revenge in the same night. That's 2 losses in Ankalaev's entire professional career, one of them in his UFC debut back in 2018, where Paul Craig submitted him with a triangle choke with 1 second left on the clock after Ankalaev had won virtually every other second of that fight, and the other to Alex Pereira in a rematch after Ankalaev had already beaten him for the belt. Everyone else who ran their mouth got dealt with, and that's really the pattern with Magomed Ankalaev. He isn't a trash talker by nature. He barely says anything at all in the build-up compared to most contenders. He doesn't do face-off theatrics, he doesn't perform for cameras, and he doesn't need a nickname or a gimmick to sell a fight. He just walks people down, takes away everything they're good at, and lets the result do the talking for him. There's no theater to it, which is arguably what makes it so unsettling to watch. Cutelaba bumped his forehead and got knocked out twice. Smith said he wasn't the boogeyman and got his legs chopped out and beaten up on the mat. Walker came in with a 3-fight streak and left with a broken nose. Pereira said he was going to make fun of him and lost his championship. That's a fairly consistent set of outcomes for people who decide to test him. 4 different fighters, 4 different styles, 4 different levels of confidence going in, and the same ending every single time. The next time Ankalaev steps inside the cage, he'll be up against Bogdan Guskov, who steps in on short notice to headline UFC Fight Night at the Etihad Arena in Abu Dhabi on July 25th, after Khalil Roundtree Jr. withdrew injured. Guskov is no soft touch either. He has 18 wins, and every single one of them is a finish, with 13 of those coming inside the very first round. And he's getting his first ever main event on 2 weeks' notice against a former world champion. He is exactly the kind of explosive, all-or-nothing power puncher that Ankalaev has been dismantling for years. Ankalaev sits at number 1 in the division, 1 win away from a shot at getting his belt back, with a champion in Carlos Ulberg currently sidelined after knee surgery. Will Bogdan Guskov be next on Ankalaev's humbling list at UFC Abu Dhabi? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked the video, and subscribe to the channel. We will see you in the next one.